On a gray rainy afternoon in Los Angeles, Dakota Johnson was on her way home from filming. Her car was suddenly swerved by another vehicle, causing her to lose control and crash into the median. The sound of metal colliding and glass breaking echoed in the rain, leaving a moment of panic in the middle of the busy street. Dakota was taken to the hospital with minor injuries but lost a lot of blood. The news quickly spread to Jamie Dornan, her co-star and the person who had a deep bond with her. When Jamie heard the news, he was speechless, his hands shaking, his heart felt like someone was squeezing it. He immediately put aside all his schedules and took an emergency flight to the U.S. In the hospital hallway, Jamie stood silently in front of the emergency room door, his eyes filled with anxiety. He recalled every moment they spent together on set, the laughter, the warm hugs. "I should have been there," he whispered softly, his eyes red. When Dakota woke up, her face was pale but she was still smiling when she saw Jamie. He held her hand tightly, his voice trembling. "Please, don't scare me like that again." At that moment, even though there was a distance between them, Jamie understood that there was nothing more precious than the person he cared about still existing in this world. Dakota was still lying there, the dim light from the hospital lamp shining on her face, making everything look so fragile that Jamie feared that if he closed his eyes for a second, she would disappear. He sat next to the bed, his hand never letting go of hers since entering. "Jamie, don't worry, I'm fine," Dakota tried to say, but her voice was weak, each word was swallowed into the air. He shook his head, his eyes red. "Fine? Do you know when I heard the news I thought I would never see you again?" Dakota looked deeply into his eyes, a flash of emotion flashing. Between them were a series of memories that seemed buried, now flooding back, laughter, furtive touches, even looks that no one dared to admit. Out in the hallway, the sound of rain still falling, mixed with the sound of the heart monitor going, beep, beep, as if reminding that time was still passing. Jamie leaned down, gently placed a kiss on Dakota's hand, and whispered like an oath, "I will not lose you, never." She closed her eyes, letting Jamie's hot tears fall on her skin, feeling the fear and affection he had held for so many years. At that moment, the accident not only nearly took Dakota's life, but also ignited a fire that they both thought had long since gone out. A day later, Dakota was out of danger. The media began to search for information, the hospital was surrounded by paparazzi and reporters. The news of Jamie Dornan staying by Dakota Johnson's side after the accident flooded social media. The photos of his worried eyes by the hospital bed further stirred up public opinion. Jamie knew she needed peace and quiet to recover. Late one night, he quietly arranged everything. When the city was plunged into darkness, Jamie took Dakota out of the hospital through the back door, covering her head with his hoodie. The car drove through the empty streets, leaving behind both the lights and the lenses. Dakota leaned her head on his shoulder, the familiar scent of sandalwood made her feel safe. "Where are you taking me?" she asked softly. Jamie smiled, his eyes still looking straight ahead. "To a place where no one can find, just you and me." They arrived at a small wooden house by the sea, where the sound of the waves replaced the constant questions from the media. In the morning, the sunlight filtered through the window. Dakota stepped out onto the balcony, breathing in the salty air. Jamie stood in the kitchen, preparing a simple but warm breakfast. "Thank you," she said, her eyes shining with emotion. Jamie walked over, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "No need to thank me. I just want you to know, the accident made me realize what is most important in my life." Dakota turned around, and in the silence filled with only the sound of the sea, they looked at each other for a long time, as if all the distances of the past had disappeared. The days by the beach passed peacefully like a dream. Dakota gradually recovered, her face became rosy again, and Jamie clearly felt that her smile was what kept him there. But peace was never something they were allowed to keep for long. One morning, Jamie had just put his cup of coffee on the table when his phone rang. On the screen were a series of messages and missed calls from his manager. He hesitated, but then pressed the button. The big headline on the front page of the newspaper appeared. Jamie Dornan and Dakota Johnson secretly together after accident. Exclusive photo. Photos taken from afar appeared clearly on the screen. Them together on the balcony, Jamie with his arm around Dakota, his eyes full of affection. There was also a picture of him pushing her wheelchair along the beach. Dakota stepped out, saw Jamie's pale face, and asked, "What's wrong?" He handed her the phone. She stared at the screen for a few seconds, then put it down on the table, sighing. "They won't leave us alone." The sound of the waves outside suddenly became heavy. Jamie stepped forward, took her hand, and said firmly, "I don't care what they say. The only thing I'm afraid of is losing you." Dakota looked at him, her eyes both worried and emotional. She knew the storm was coming: rumors, pressure from her family, the studio, and even those who wanted to exploit this story for their own gain. But at that moment, the only thing she could do was squeeze Jamie's hand, as a silent pledge that they would get through it together. Out at sea, dark clouds had begun to gather, and they both knew that the real storm was just beginning. 3 days later, the beach house was no longer a hideout. Groups of paparazzi set up tents, pointing long cameras like sniper rifles at the windows. The sound of a news helicopter occasionally hovered overhead, drowning out the sound of the waves. That afternoon, as Dakota sat reading by the window, a small rock suddenly hit the glass. Along with it was a rolled-up piece of paper. "If you want it all to end, speak up." She held the piece of paper, a chill running down her spine. Jamie walked in, saw it, and frowned. "They're starting to play dirty," he said, his voice deep. That night, Dakota's phone received a call from an unknown number. A strange man's voice rang out, full of threats. "Do you know you're ruining both of our images? If you don't appear before the press to clarify, I'll release the clip in the hospital." Dakota was stunned, her hands shaking. Jamie heard everything, immediately grabbed the phone and said each word harshly. "Touch her again, I will not let you go." The next morning, Jamie and Dakota decided to appear publicly at a surprise press conference. When the door opened, the flashbulbs were like hundreds of knives. They walked in holding hands, ignoring the constant questions. "Are you two dating? Jamie, did you skip filming to be with Dakota? Dakota, is the pregnancy rumor true?" Jamie squeezed Dakota's hand, stepped up to the microphone, her voice resounding in the chaotic room. "Yes, we are together, and we will not let anyone tear us apart." The whole room seemed to explode. In that moment, even though they knew there would be countless storms ahead, they chose to hold hands and face them.